Hey guys, this is Nomi Const here in New York City, where we are doing a set of interviews with all of the DNC chair candidates. We've been touring around to all the different DNC forums. They call them the Future Forums, where they invite DNC members and the public in different regions to come and listen to all the candidates who are running for the positions of leadership in the Democratic National Committee. Of course, you recall that W. Wasserman Schultz, representative from Florida, stepped down in the summertime, and there has been an interim chair, Donna Brazil, who was a chair previously, and now this is the race to fill that spot, the spot that Donna Brazil has held. There are several candidates in the race at this point. Every week a new candidate pops up. We have one of the candidates who was, I believe, one of the first to announce, Chairman Raymond Buckley from New Hampshire. Thanks for joining us.
Great to see you again.
We've discussed this race in depth in previous interviews, and it's getting down to the wire. The last forum is in Baltimore. This is coming up in a couple of days, and the vote takes place in Atlanta on February 25th.
Correct.
Let's go back a little bit, just to the fundamentals of this campaign. You have a set of DNC members. Who are these DNC members?
Well, there are 447 of us. They are the chairs and vice chairs of every state and territory. So there's 57 states and territories, include D.C., the territories, Democrats abroad. And then each state has at least 2 at-large members. Everyone has at least a national committee man and national committee woman. The larger state have a few more. Then there are 75 appointees that were added on due to negotiations by Jesse Jackson at the 1988 convention. They were supposed to be for diversity, to make sure that the DNC actually reflects the diversity of the party, to make sure that there was a full array of individuals from all walks of life that were part of the policy making and running of the party. And then there are representatives of all the various constituencies. We have people from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the Democratic Senate Campaign, legislators, attorney generals, secretaries of state, the Young Democrats, the college Democrats, and on and on and on and on.
When you get to the jobs of these DNC members, do they have duties? Do they have to fulfill any sort of roles in the Democratic Party right now?
The DNC members, the DNC meets twice a year, and the only thing they have to fulfill is you have to show up to meetings. If you miss 3 meetings in a row, you will have deemed as resigned, and you will be removed as a member.
What happens at these meetings?
Very little. I think that's been a frustration by many of us over the years. That mostly the meetings are people talking to you, and there's not a lot of conversation. There's not a lot of dialogue. If you're part of the various different caucuses, you then hear the same speeches, the same people that go from room to room to room that say the same thing over and over. And generally it's the staff of the DNC along with the chair and maybe 1 or 2 other people. But rarely do you leave with any sort of valuable information. And now, of the 447, I would say 90% come to these meetings on their own dime. They actually pay for it. And there's a lot of blue-collar folks that are members of the DNC that worked really hard to get elected. And it has always been very stressful, to me anyways, that their time is essentially wasted. I look at that with the convention as well. The fact that we had 20,000 activists in the city of Philadelphia, and nobody left Philadelphia with a skill that they didn't arrive with. And why would you not have taken advantage of that to create some trainings and some discussion groups and information? I've been part of the LGBT caucus of the DNC since I first got elected. We were at that point just getting created. It actually wasn't adopted till 2001. So for the first year and a half, I was helping pull it together. But we don't share any information with each other. We don't know, I don't even necessarily always know who's a member of the caucus if you don't show up at the meeting. And it's not like people even go around the room and introduce themselves. It's a very difficult situation. And for those of us who, I've been on the executive committee, and I was so excited. coming from a very, very low-income, poor background. My first meeting was in 2001, and I sat down and I happened to realize I was sitting next to Jim Roosevelt, who was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandson, and Harold Ickes was on the other side of me, and Harold Ickes' dad was in Roosevelt's administration in the cabinet. And I was trying to imagine what my grandparents were thinking when my mom was born in 1942 on their farm, and that their grandson was going to be in a place where they were equal with Franklin Delano Roosevelt's grandson. And I was just so proud, and I was so excited. And then the meeting happened, and I realized that I wasn't really told anything that nobody else just reading the newspaper didn't already know. You're not really asked anything. You're not part of anything. So what I've taken to making sure is that there's a diversity among the membership, at least making sure that everyone is at the table. I worked very hard for years to make sure there was an out lesbian on the executive committee, and finally got that done. And then I worked very hard to make sure we had a transgender member on the DNC, and now she's on the executive committee. So I'm very proud of that. I'm making sure that there are different people. I'm committed to making sure there are more Native Americans on the DNC, and there are other individuals as well that I think really need to have more of a voice, because the way I would run the meetings would be entirely different than how they've been run for the last couple of decades.
We talk about these quotas, and I'm using that term loosely, but making sure there's a certain number of people that represent different communities.
They call them goals.
Goals.
Yeah.
Goals, fancy word. How about union members?
Union is pretty well represented on there, whether it's at-large appointees or people actually elected. Calling through, I find a lot of the at-large members that are elected from the states happen to be either the state Fed presidents or head of ASME or head of the IBW or something like that. So there's a pretty healthy percentage. I would say there's probably a larger percentage of union members on the DNC than in the general public, but it is supposed to represent the Democratic Party's base, so I think that's important.
On the other side, there are members right now, I've been going through the list, and in New York State alone, I think a good 15 to 20% of the members are consultants. One has the largest contract, as far as we know so far, with the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates. Some are lobbyists. How do you feel about having DNC members who are doing direct business with the DNC or major candidates that could be in a primary? Is there any sort of conflict of interest rule that you think would be helpful for the DNC?
No, I think that's one of the things that I talk about that I put right in my original speech back in Denver in early December. The DNC should not have those sorts of conflicts, and if you're going to be a member of the DNC, then you should not be in there also bidding for consulting fees or contracts. We need to make sure that we have a greater diversity of our not just the contracts, but of our vendors and our staff. Staff really needs to reflect I think the diversity of the Democratic population, and I think it's especially important as we bring young people in that we make sure that we make a special effort to make sure that there's young African American, young Latino, young Asian Pacific, and young LGBT and those sorts of folks. I've tried to do that in my campaigns. I've tried to do that as a state party chair, and I think we do that remarkably well. Despite New Hampshire not having a lot of diversity, we are able to be a training ground for an enormous number of young folks.
You've famously been the candidate who announced that he would like to see the budget open. You're vice chair. You've never seen the budget of the Democratic Party, and you're in a leadership position. You're an executive in the party. And you've talked about this, and now everybody seems to be for opening up the budget. Would you be open to an audit of the Democratic Party and some of the other organizations like the DCCC, the Congressional Committee, and the Senate Committee, and maybe even the state parties?
Well, we don't have any real responsibility over the DTRIP or the DGA. Those are separate entities. But the DNC alone, at least the officers should know what's being done. And so I called for a real change about how we actually do that. So I've been an officer, a vice chair representing the state parties for the last 8 years, the only officer that was actually elected. The others were appointed by the White House.
Interesting.
And so I had a different perspective for the last 8 years that was different from everyone else. And what I believe is that any employee that makes over $100,000 a year should go before the officers, and we should approve that hiring. Any contract that we're signing of over $100,000 should come to the officers. That sort of, and we should get a monthly update on the budget and expenditures, and that the senior staff needs to come before us and actually tell us what programs they're working on. Are they being effective? I mean, do we have staff working on this or working on that? I think, the whole hacking, maybe if we had been more engaged and involved and known that we were doing it haphazardly and did not actually have a real company doing it, would have saved us a lot of money that we're now spending to protect the employees and the systems within the DNC. I think that so while those, the idea of getting into the money situation in the other state parties and other committees is an intriguing thing down the road. At the very least we should do is really get ourselves together at the DNC.
Or calling for it.
Yeah.
Something as a figurehead. The money situation has been something that I've been very interested in. I've been really trying to follow as much as possible. Of course, it's hard when there's no open budget. But what shocks me is the Democratic Party has raised more money than ever. Of course, they had a sitting president. They raised more money for the presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton. Of course, in the past 8 years, they've raised more money. Yet they've lost more seats than the late 20s, 1920s, over 1,000 seats. The Democratic Party has never been weaker.
And that's why I've been frustrated by continually being asked, well, how are you going to raise the money to do all this investment in the grassroots and build the infrastructure that needs to be done? And I was like, we don't need to raise any more money. Right. It's about how we spend the money. And it is infuriating that what we're doing is making these consultants within D.C. multimillionaires, and the media, corporate media that owns all those television stations, ridiculously wealthy.
And they're giving money to the Democratic Party too, are they not? Like Time Warner was a big sponsor of the DNC, You don't know.
I don't know.
Well, they bought out. They put out ads and they sponsored the DNC, so they actually have.
You're telling me.
Yeah.
So what is frustrating is that we saw that investing in the state parties worked in 06 and 08. I understand and I appreciate there were folks that were making decisions that had never really operated within a state party and didn't really understand that that was part of their success going into 08. But look at where we were in 08 compared to where we are today. And I absolutely believe that if we had continued that level or maybe even an increase in state parties, we're spending about $250,000 per year in every state party. I'm talking about in Wyoming, Florida, Maine, West Virginia, every single state got $250,000 roughly. And that was roughly about 5 field organizers. For most of the last 8 years, it was to between 60,000 and a little over 100,000, which simply was not enough to actually do the work. I think that what we've done in New Hampshire has proven that investing in the grassroots and respecting those who are volunteers on the local level actually makes a difference. We were able to actually track the turnout, the increase in the turnout in 2014 and 2016 completely falls along the lines of where we had for local organizations where people actually were going door to door talking to their neighbors. And it wasn't about out-of-state volunteers coming in doing it. It was about actual neighbors talking to neighbors. It increased. Turnout in 2014 was down about 3% from 2010. which was a bad year.
Right. We got a shellacking in 2010.
And New Hampshire was up almost 4%. It was like a 7% turnaround, but it wasn't in every single community. And when we looked at it, it was based on how many local people were talking to their neighbors. And I came back to the DNC in 2015 and said, I got the answer. We can do this. And because nobody makes any money off from hiring organizers, nobody makes any money off opening up local offices, nobody in Washington cared. And that's why I'm running against it. And I know that on paper, you look at it, I've obviously got the experience to be the chair, but I don't have the people beating down the doors trying to give me money like the other candidates.
2016, of course, we all know the Bernie Hillary thing, but it did inspire, it has inspired, whether it's by electing Donald Trump and having thousands, tens of thousands of women say that they want to run for office, or young people who felt disaffected and frustrated after the Bernie Sanders campaign. There's thousands of people now who are willing and ready to run for office. But we know it takes a lot of money to run for office for the most part. And it's not easy breaking through some of these local parties. Now, you're chair of a state party, a small state, has a very active membership. It's not like that in some of these other state parties. And
it's very frustrating.
How do you change that culture? How do you tell the chair of a party where maybe the chair's been there for 30 years and all the people who are running that party, hey, let that young person in and run for legislator? Or listen.
Well, I think that's an important kind of conversation, and that's sort of the dysfunction of the DNC, because have been perfectly willing to have that sort of conversation with chairs, but because a complaint will go to the DNC building and then it disappears, because the DNC building doesn't actually care about the grassroots. And so I never found out about it, so I could never make that hard call. But I was always willing to call a chair and say, hey, you've got to open up your doors. One of the things that when I go around to talk to different state parties, I said, I should not be the youngest person in this room. There's something wrong if I am the youngest person. And it's absolutely true. I should never attend a meeting other than for the senior council that I am the youngest person in any Democratic room. It's just not right. I become very agitated when I see that happening, because clearly what's happening, and I try explaining to people that our business is to winning elections, because when we win elections, we actually can move the ball forward and make a better society. And we all got involved because we want equality, we want justice, we want a progressive future. And if you're not electing somebody, if you're not even, okay, maybe you're in a state where you can't win a statewide race, but can you elect a local sheriff? Can you elect a local county commissioner? Can you elect a local mayor? You can do something. Everyone can do something. Because even if you can't win a statewide, and maybe it's really bad what's going on at your state capital, but if you can make your little town a little better by having a progressive leading it, then you've done something to make the world a better place. And respecting those individuals and encouraging them. But we're not going to kind of build that sort of grassroots network without giving the sort of tools to the state parties to really open up and welcome people.
Do the state party chairs meet?
Well, we meet. We meet 4 times a year. We meet in conjunction with the DNC meetings, and then we have 2 other meetings in between where we do week-long trainings and discussions. And our meetings are completely different than the way the DNC meetings are. The way I run the ASTC is by consensus, and it's been very difficult over the years for the DNC staff and leadership to understand how I run the ASTC. That they say, well, we want you to do this. I was like, well, I'm sorry, but the membership voted to do that. And they're in charge, and they cannot process that I let the membership decide. And they think that somehow I just go and tell them what to do. And I was like, no, that's not leadership to me. It's here are the options that we have. Let's all discuss it. What do we think has worked out best? And we move forward. And that's exactly how I would want to have it run the DNC. I want to be able to open it up, allow the executive committee to be much more involved, allow the membership of the DNC to be much more involved, make these meetings with trainings as well, and discussion groups, and really talk about what you're hearing on the grassroots. We're not sharing of any information. I've always been so frustrated because somebody might be in some other state just fix something that I'm having a problem with, and I don't know about it because there's no communication going on. And that was the frustrating thing with the Black Caucus, as an example, or the Latino Caucus, or LGBT Caucus, or Asian Pacific Caucus. There are phenomenal leaders that are members of those caucuses that could be incredibly helpful to almost every state party has those caucuses as well, but there's no communication between the national caucus and the state party caucuses. And to be able to get some of those remarkable people to come to speak at our local caucuses and involve, when I go to a state party convention or dinner, I was asked to speak to the local LGBT group or Stonewall group. And I've had some fascinating conversations in a remote island in Alaska.
Right.
There were 30 people showed up to talk about LGBT issues. And for them, hearing from me, having had the 30 plus years experience working in the LGBT movement, for that, I was the first person they ever talked to that had really been through that entire process and it could explain how it is. And so I think sharing of that stuff we don't talk to each other on the DNC. We don't talk to the voters. We don't talk to anybody. There's no conversations going on anymore, and that is not a successful way to run any organization.
How do you get these young people who don't communicate through organizations anymore, who don't identify with the brand of Democratic Party? I mean, really, it's much more than just organizational stuff. It's how do you
action items, and I tell the people around the country, it's like if you want people who have naturally brown hair to come to your meetings, then you have to have an action item. They have no interest in coming and listening to a treasurer's report and a secretary's report and something that they did 3 years ago. Are we writing postcards to Amnesty International? Are we making phone calls to protect health care? Are we organizing a march for LGBT rights? Are we doing something and trying to change the focus of these meetings into being actually action items? You actually are doing something too.
And we saw that in Secretary Clinton's campaign. She had Lady Gaga and Katy Perry and every actor and celebrity, but she couldn't get young people. I was going to I remember being in New Hampshire and it was very early in the campaign, and I took a picture of Senator Sanders' crowd, and it was young people screaming, passing out cards of organizational stuff. It was like an activist meeting, and I looked at Secretary Clinton's crowd and a bunch of seated seats in an auditorium with no offense to older members of the community, but it was a much older, tried, listen to the speaker. And when I talk to young people, they say, we want the Democratic Party to be the tool for our engagement.
Well, and I saw that. I obviously I wasn't able to go to those events in the primary, so I'm not familiar with that. But what I did do is we ended up having 28 local offices in New Hampshire. The Hillary campaign gave us resources for about 7, and we found the money to open up the rest, working with local committees, because I think it's important to create them as community centers and open them up early in the summer, hopefully in June, where people get used to coming. And what blew me away, I was a volunteer fiend when I was a little kid, and as high school, I was always at the headquarters, but I was often by far the youngest person. There was rarely ever another high school kid there. I never went to an office in New Hampshire that did not have 3 to 4 high school kids in it. And that so inspired me. The fact that they broke through and realized that this was their future and that they were going to fight so hard for it. And so what I did is when we had the big dinner 2 weekends before the election, I sent an email out to all of the headquarters. I said, send me the name of 4 or 5 of your high school kids and let's give them free tickets and let them come to the dinner. And we ended up with about 5 tables of high school kids there. Wow. Those dinners, you always want to raise as much money as possible. But I remember going to them as a high school kid And those were magic moments to me, where you actually are in the same room with your governor, with your senators and congressmen and other people that you read about, and you get to see it. I mean, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so it's worth the $25 that it costs you to give them the rubber chicken. And it's just, I just think that's so important that we make sure to always include the young folks. And that's why we do so well. We've got a full-time executive director with our New Hampshire Young Democrats, and we elected, 10 under 30 to our legislature. Mm-hmm. Granted, we have a large legislature, so it's a little easier, but we made a real effort to make sure that they were included and involved. And they had a massive fundraising event on a couple hundred people on Friday evening, where they handed out awards to each other, and I'm just so proud.
They're learning to organize on their own.
And because if you're not bringing new people along, who's going to replace you? And I see this happen in state party after state party. And it is not that I am determined to figure out that you'll have a state party that is just phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But it's because they have a great state chair and or a great executive director. And when that person or those two people leave, the thing just goes to shit. And that shouldn't happen. There should be some systems in there. There should be some sort of a built-in, so that the programs continue and the energy continues, and that it shouldn't be wrapped around the personality of who holds the position.
So in 2008, I worked on the Obama campaign, mm-hmm. right? In 2012.
I was state party chair.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't gone far. I haven't gone far.
So when I worked on the 2012 campaign, there was quite a bit of a difference in culture on the campaign. And one of the things that launched out of the 2012 campaign that was different than the 2008 campaign was this organized operation for not young Obama supporters, but young Obama donors and fundraisers and bundlers. And that was my way of getting involved in 2012. I had no option. I had to learn how to become a professional fundraiser.
And Jared Milrad was involved in that,
yes.
Who had worked in New Hampshire with us.
And fair enough, you do need to fundraise for the party, but there was no other way. I either had to join the campaign and give up my job and do that, or learn how to fundraise. With that being said, you saw a lot of the energy that was there in 2008 drop off because people didn't know how to fundraise. They didn't want to fundraise. They didn't want to be in that class of people. It was an activist. And frankly, I didn't really like doing it either. With that being said, you've got this concept, the OFA story. And it's something that I don't see addressed. I'm not hearing it being talked about on these panels. But OFA was supposed to be this activist side that never happened, right? And now they're saying we want to bring back OFA. Instead of bringing back OFA, what are you going to do the 2017 version of OFA? Instead of sticking to the 50-state strategy, what is instead of responding to the past or fixing the problems of the past, how do you create the next 2017 thing that's going to change the Democratic Party and win you back all these seats?
There's a lot of questions in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, essentially what I was saying is that OFA never really became a thing. It became a fundraising thing.
Correct.
And now we've lost all these seats. So what's going to solve it?
Well, OFA complicated a lot of things. One of the frustrating things is in 2000, right after the election, for those of us with vibrant state parties, we desperately wanted to know who all those thousands of new people were that got involved. Almost everybody in New Hampshire that's in elective office or in party activist was first attracted to a presidential candidate at some point. And so it brings in this whole generation of new people, comes in. And we were not given those lists. We were not allowed access. So we didn't know who the volunteers were. We didn't know who these young people, we couldn't fold them into the party. We were not given those lists until after the 2013. So at this point, we are talking that there could have potentially been 6 years old. And so it wasn't until after the re-elect. So to me, we lost an entire generation of people that could have been the new state party chairs, the new county chairs, the new state reps, the state senators, all those sorts of people. What I did is cross-check some of the FEC. That's how I did candidate recruitments. We had a state senator, because I saw that he gave $10 to Barack Obama. And I was like, well, we need a candidate in this district. I'll just cold call him and find out if he's interested. And he did, and he got elected. But you have, but
That's incredible.
Well, that's the
Never
sort of
heard
work you got to do to try to
Wow.
bring, because I knew that there were some new people out there. And trying to get that. But I should have had to do that.
Right.
And other state parties, maybe the chair isn't full time, and maybe they didn't know how to do all that. Maybe they didn't have all the experience that I've had for decades. We should have been able to have access. We were told that these people had a unique relationship. If I'd heard that one more time, I was going to scream. A unique relationship with Barack Obama, that they didn't want to be part of the party. Well, you give them the option. Let them find out what the party really is. Maybe they never actually was welcomed into the party. And so those state parties that wanted to have them involved, why not bring them in? So OFA was this whole separate organizing group. I think that we didn't focus on the right things. I don't think the OFA focused on the right things right away. God love the president. He tried. He absolutely was convinced that he and his circle had convinced that they changed politics forever, and never understood for a good couple of years at how huge the Republican opposition was going to be. And so we didn't start off when he had all that popularity and we had all those numbers. We had 60 U.S. senators, we had the majority and all this. That's when we should have gone after the weak-kneed Republicans and put pressure on them. Because one thing I learned being in the legislature in New Hampshire for 18 years, if you pull in some Republicans, suddenly the weak-kneed Democrats behave because it gives them cover. And I kept telling that to the White House. It's like, why are we not going after these Republicans that happen to be in Democratic states at that time? Or remember, they knocked a lot of them out in the primaries, over the course of the last 8 years. But at that time, there were some moderate, so to speak, Republicans in the Senate and in the House.
Right.
We could have actually had even a bigger change. But it's about tactics. It's about where you came from. It's your experiences in life. But that's what I absolutely believe. I think right now, you asked what the unifying issue is. I think Donald Trump is a massive recruitment and unifying, and we need to go full blast on those Republicans that are in those districts that we can take out, and because every Democrat will line up if we can get the Republicans. So let's do that this cycle. At some point, perhaps Donald Trump's going to get his act together. I doubt it, but if he does, we will have squandered this time if we didn't utilize it to bring it.
The New York Times today, there was a story about how his staff, his senior staff, is going to reassess their strategies because guess what? The protests have been making a difference.
Yeah, and I think we need to encourage them, and people standing up and speaking out. I mean, I don't know how many protests you were part of, but certainly as a high schooler, I took bus down here to for nuclear disarmament. We did a march on the UN when I was out 15.
Wow.
We did marches. I got arrested at the Seabrook nuclear power plant when I was 17. That's what young people want to do. They want to get out and actually make their voice heard. So encourage people to do that. Don't say, oh, that's a bad thing to do. I think we need to encourage as much activism as possible.
Just coming back to the DNC real quick before we wrap up, the DNC seems to have been a vehicle for presidential cycles, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, of course, stepped down in the summertime, partly because WikiLeaks, whether the hacking was. Listen, there's an argument over the hacking itself, and then there's an argument about the content.
Listen, whether or not, to me, we're past the discussion of whether there was a thumb on the scale or not.
Right.
Because there was an appearance of the thumb on the scale. So if you're doing something that creates the appearance, it's just as bad. So you can't do anything that even creates that sort of appearance. And so I don't think we'll ever know definitively.
Right.
But the fact is that there was certainly more opportunities to have that appearance, and that was wrong. And that's why I came out really strong. And when I give my remarks, the very first thing I talk about is talking about this nominating process. And that's what I offer. And it's completely different than the other candidates running for chair, is that I was involved in the process in either 08 or in 16. I was a state party chair. And as the chair of the First Nation primary, I'm absolutely committed to making sure that we are 100% neutral. And I have done that, whether it was walking Bernie in to make sure that he got to be on the ballot, ballot, or it's making sure that the rooms always had the same percentage of, like we would block the sale of tickets to our dinners to known supporters so that neither side could overwhelm the other at the events. I mean, we really worked very hard to be fair as possible. At our state convention in the September, normally we would have had it in a high school gym. Well, if it had been a high school gym, there are about 900 folks that would have come as our regular delegates. Well, 85% of them would have been Hillary supporters because she had locked up the sport. So Bernie would have come, and it would have been just simply speaking to the activists and the regulars that come to the convention, and I didn't think that was a fair opportunity for him to be able to talk to Democratic activists. And so we went to our arena and opened it up, and we ended up having 4,000 people there. And it allowed people to come to the arena and actually hear him, hear Martin O'Malley, hear the other candidates that are running. I consciously did things over and over to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to appear, everyone had a fair opportunity to be able to make a presentation. And that's what we need to do on the level. So the debates, the chair should never have that sort of authority. I think it needs to be put into the role of the full executive committee, over 40 members from all walks of life. They should have that authority of determining what the debate schedule is. I think at the very least, you would have people that were then agreeing with you versus the situation that happened last time where she was standing alone. The joint fundraising agreements, I don't think that any of us really appreciated what was really happening. And so I will say one thing unilaterally: I would never sign a joint fundraising agreement with anyone in a primary again. And whatever each state party want to do, that's up to them. But as far as I'm concerned, it just opens too many questions. It is not what I thought it was. I thought the money was going into a lockbox. I thought the money was going to go to that specific state party. That is not what happened in any way. And I'm not saying I was misled. I just didn't understand. And I learned my lesson, and we're not going to do that again. Certainly not in New Hampshire, anyways. And I think the caucuses, I think that the enthusiasm that folks had for the candidates, and they would show up, and the state parties were not capable. Remember, state parties weren't getting the support, so many of them have 2 or 3 employees, and you're literally dealing with tens of thousands of people showing up. How could you process all of them? How could you get them all involved? And so it looked chaotic, it looked crazy, and it just didn't work. And I traveled to Maine to help out, I traveled to Nevada to help out, and the DNC had a position of they didn't want to get involved. Well, I think the DNC needs to go in there and supplement to make sure that everyone gets, this is about voting rights as far as I'm concerned.
How can you say that you're for voting rights on a national level when in New York, for instance, a judge just ordered, said that people's voting, their ballots during the primary were eliminated, that's against the law. I mean, that's happened all over the country. Arizona, my grandmother's been voting in Arizona since 1946, was denied at the polls during the primary because she wasn't a Democrat, they said.
Yeah, I mean, we have a different system in New Hampshire.
Right.
We do have voter registration, unlike there are many states that don't have any voter registration, but in New Hampshire we do. But we allow any independent or unregistered person, because we have same-day voter registration. You could wake up late in the afternoon and decide, you know what, I'm going to go vote. And they go, they register, and they get to vote. And you take a Democratic ballot, you become declared a Democrat for that time period, and on your way out, you sign a postcard saying that you want to revert to being an independent. It's that simple. I think, now other people may disagree, but I think having the more amount of people involved in your primary and your nominating process means that you're going to have those people listening to your candidates going into the general election. New Hampshire is a state that's split right down the middle. We're very competitive, but we've been winning elections. So I think our way of doing things might be a secret that some of the other states need to replicate. We won 11 out of the last 13 statewide races. We have the entire congressional delegation for the first time in history. Both U.S. senators, both members of Congress. I think that's an important thing that some of these states that might be a lot bluer than New Hampshire may want to look at when they're trying to say, oh, who can participate and who can't. I'm not obsessed about who's a registered Democrat in New Hampshire. I really gave up thinking about that years ago when I said, as long as they're voting Democratic, what do I care if they're actually a registered Democrat? My focus is getting them to the polls so that they vote for the Democratic candidates. Because once again, after all, this is about electing people that will vote for a progressive future. If it's not moving the ball forward, if it's not having more justice and equality, then what are we doing?
Why would anybody be against this stuff? What you're saying right now makes perfect sense to our audience, to me, but it's you're saying things that other people aren't saying. And of course, you have experiences that are different. But why would anybody in the Democratic Party, in the DNC, the members, the people who are voting, why would they be against this?
I hate to disparage other people, but I have found that often times when people don't act in the common good, there are one or two reasons: power or money. And since I have neither, it's very easy for me not to take that into perspective. But I think that it is frustrating. I am still that little 7-year-old living in the basement of the elderly couple who learned of slavery and was so mortified that humans would do that to another human that I started volunteering at 8 years old. That's still who I am, and I haven't lost that. And that's why it was so emotional in '08 when we were in Invesco Field and the anniversary of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and to realize that I'm standing there as an openly gay state party chair, leading my state delegation when Barack Obama accepted the nomination. And I just felt that really gave my life so much purpose, that it was really the issue of the mistreatment, the horror of slavery, the mistreatment of African Americans that motivated me to be involved in politics in the first place. And it just made me so proud. And right now, I'm not proud about a lot of stuff.
Chairman Buckley, thank you.
Thank you.
I will see you in Baltimore.
Thank you.
And then Atlanta.
Yes.
and then hopefully again soon.
We'll see.
All right, thanks guys. This is you're watching the Young Turks TYT Politics here at YouTube Live in New York. I'm Nomi Konst. We'll be back shortly.